Today is January 15th, 2012. My name is Marty Dick, and I'm interviewing Nate Wheeler, who grew up in Sunshine Canyon and who lost his childhood home in the fire. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks. I'm excited to do this. So I guess my story begins, I was born in Arizona, but my mother was born in the house where I grew up. You also have an interview with her. And my grandfather built it when he came to Boulder for college in the 60s. And so it was a third generation home, and loved it. It was great to grow up there. When the fire happened, I was in my last semester of college. I was just starting my last semester. And I was living at home, but I was, at that time, I was house sitting for some family friends. I'm a musician, and I was studying music composition at the time. And I was in college at the University of Colorado. Thank you. And in the composition department there. And I had, it was a long-term house-sitting job, and so I had basically moved in. I had my instruments, which included a harmonium, my trombone, my computer, all my hard drives, everything that I use to make music and create art. I had with me in the house that I was house-sitting. And I was there one morning and got a phone call from my dad. This is the morning of September 6th and of Labor Day, and my dad called and said, "Hey, if you are interested in the fire, you have the car with the scanner in it." And I said, "The fire?" And he said, "Yeah, there's a fire in Fourmile Canyon." And I was driving his car at the time, which had a police radio fire scanner in it. And so I found out about it, and I grabbed my video camera, and I jumped in the car, and I drove out to my great aunt's house to record some video footage of it. Huge, the plumes of smoke, which were at that point only starting to become what they became. But and so I guess there's a little backstory to that, in that the reason I grabbed my camera was because, it being my last semester, I had decided to do a thesis project. And the project, I had been doing all of this research for my composing, my final piece, that was all about the integration of humanity and nature, and finding the border, kind of where they intersect. Because I still feel that it's kind of erroneous, this idea that humanity is separate. We have this idea that we have this huge effect on the world, and the things that we do are separate from, we consider it free. I believe nature in French or something is the word free. But in any case, that whole concept was very interesting to me, and so I wanted to research that. And so I was spending a lot of time around the house, in the woods, doing sketches, making field recordings, and just kind of gathering general inspiration from the areas around my house and from Boulder Creek and all of these areas, these places where humans and nature really intersect. And now I live in Brooklyn, where there isn't that much of that. It's a lot of concrete and a lot of rats, as opposed to kind of the much more natural feeling setting of Boulder. But so I was doing all this research for the show, and when my dad called me and said there was a fire, I said, "Oh my God, this is it. This is nature proving that man is not as significant as we think we are." I didn't know the scale that would be, I didn't know the scale of that. But so I grabbed my camera, and I ran out to my great aunt's house, and she lives currently on Table Mesa, but on this great hill that has this amazing overlook of the whole Front Range. And so I went over to her, and I'm listening to the scanner the whole time, and I'm I'm like, oh my God. So I grab my sound recorder and I set it up next to the scanner. And I'm recording the calls as dispatch is sending them out to the fire departments, to the sheriff, doing all these things. I'm switching between channels, and managed to hear right when I got in the car is when, I believe it was Poor Man, I can't remember who lost it, but that one fire engine that was lost on Poor Man. I remember hearing that call, and I have the recording of it. And then when they moved the base to Canyon, to the Justice Center, when they moved the center of operations to that point. Those are two very particular milestones that I remember just in listening, saying, wow, this thing is getting really big really fast. So I drove to my aunt's house, set up my camera, she made me lunch, and she was so cute about it. She was just very excited to help. And so that was really wonderful of her. And then I got some really good footage of the plume just kind of starting at that point, which would later basically come to envelop the whole sky, or at least half of it. But so I got some really good footage of that, and then decided to drive back to where my father was working to check in on him and make sure, because he didn't have a car, I thought, because I was driving his car. And so I drove back to his work to find out that we had been evacuated, and that he had driven my mom's car, and my grandfather owns 2 cars. And so my mom got one, my grandfather got the other, and they drove them all down. So all our cars were safe through this, series of events. But so while I was talking to him, we were looking at maps and seeing, okay, well, really, how far is 4 Mile from Sunshine? Did we need to be evacuated? Is it just a safety measure, And then a neighbor showed up and was looking for a map of the region so he could find a back road to go up and save his dogs. And we got out a map and said, well, they haven't closed Left Hand yet. You could probably go up the back way. There's a trail that you can take by foot that would get you in there. And about 10 minutes after that, his fiancée shows up with a phone call that someone had busted into their house and saved their dogs. And so, that was a really touching story just right away. But my dad and I are sitting there saying, oh, it's 3 ridges away. They're evacuating us because they think they have to, but nothing's going to happen. And we're totally cocksure and just very upbeat about the whole thing. And then after that, I said goodbye and went back to the house and just kind of meditated on things for a while and was just kind of processing, but also the whole time listening to see, checking for updates to see where the fire was spreading, what was going on. Later on that day, I found out that the family had all moved to my aunt's house in Lafayette. This is a different aunt, my mom's sister, who grew up in the house. And it was my mom and my aunt and my 2 uncles, who also lived just down the hill from us. Their house was safe. You can see the fire line of where someone went through and just brushed 6 inches of pine needles to dirt. And on one side, the pine needles are burned, and on one side, they're not. And it was really striking to see that. But so we went there and spent a lot of time. They pitched a tent in the backyard. There are 4 dogs there. And I didn't spend a lot of time there. I kept making sure that I was checking in on the family and seeing if they needed me for anything. But at the time, I felt my situation was very different from theirs because I didn't have many possessions in the house. All my essentials I had with me. Whereas they had to scramble with the power off to find whatever they needed. I was also in school at the time at CU and was like 6 weeks in or 5 weeks into the semester at that point. And that's when homework was really starting to get serious, and midterms were coming up, and it was a lot of work that needed to be done there. And so I felt kind of guilty because I felt like I needed to give time and energy to my family. but at the same time, even they were like, just do what you need to do. Get through it. And many of my teachers were really surprised that I was going to class, because they you know, I mean, it's a hard thing to relate to in any case, but especially for them, they were like, wow, you're still doing your assignments, and you're doing well, and your house is, you know, you've been evacuated, basically. And so, yeah, but I don't know. I think school was kind of my rock in a way. It's like, it was that structure that I needed to prevent myself from getting caught up in the negative feedback loop of not knowing what was going on, not knowing if the house was still standing, being unaware of any of that stuff. And so I feel really like I was in the right place for that time, you know. So while the whole thing is going on, I'm getting field recordings and taking video shots of you know, the sky, and trying to figure out how I'm going to articulate all of this, because what I decided was that my whole thesis piece was going to be based on the fire, was going to be based on my experience with this. Even before I knew whether or not the house was gone, I decided that's what it was going to be about. So let's see, where do I go from here? Okay. So we spend, you know, the 3 days. We're always driving to the bottom of the canyon, seeing if the cops will let us up, trying to figure out when we're going to know, how we're going to know. We keep getting claims from different people of, oh, so-and-so said your house burned down. Oh, so-and-so said it's still standing. There's no photographic proof of anything. And so me being my empirical self for my own safety is saying, until I have proof, I'm not going to make any sort of emotional decision. I'm not going to allow myself to go down any path until I know for a fact that the house is standing or not. And then I knew that this piece would be my method of processing it, you know, whatever happened. And so eventually news comes out. They give us the whole list of the structures that have burned, and my uncle's house is on it and our house is not. But we have neighbors who have gone up on ATVs, kind of guerrilla style, and have said that my uncle's house is standing, and that there was some just kind of confusion because a lot of the firefighters who came through, the mailboxes had been burned down, or it was really hard to identify the different. I mean, it was hard for people to find our house to begin with, but it was, you know, things were not super organized up there, and so I think there was some confusion. So eventually we get to go up. I get a call while I'm in class. I'm studying Bach in this class, and I get a phone call from my mom, and I just have to step out of class to get it. And she says, we're going up to the house in an hour. And I said, okay, I'm coming. And so I ditched the rest of class, and I drove up there with my parents, or with my mom and my aunt and one of my uncles. And we just went around, and this was the first time that we had seen it, and it was confirmed. And it was stunning. The whole thing was stunning to me, because I had already been kind of processing it as a piece of art, and so my approach to the entire thing was just to look at it as a resource, as a palette, basically. And to draw from that my inspiration. And so the first thing that I noticed was that anything that was flammable had been erased. It had just been vaporized, basically. And anything that was, you know, like metals with a melting point below the temperature of the fire were melted, you know. So basically all you have are copper and steel in their original forms, and everything else has been transformed. And I felt kind of like that was a metaphor for the process of going through the whole thing, you know, because there was part of me that had been completely erased, part of me that had been essentially totally transformed. But then there was this other part that remained constant, that was easy to maintain, I guess, you know. Go hang on for a second.
We're continuing an interview here with Nate Wheeler, who grew up in Sunshine Canyon and has been telling us his experiences with the Fourmile Canyon Fire, the 6th and 7th and 8th and 9th of September 2010.
Yes, so to backtrack a little bit, I think it was around the 8th or the 9th, it was the 3rd or 4th day of the fire, when finally the sheriff and fire departments and everyone who was involved said that it would be safe for people to go back up the canyon. Just before that, maybe the day before, we had received via email from a bunch of sources. Everybody was constantly communicating. It was one of the most unifying community experiences I think we've had. Sad to say, but we were all in constant communication, and one of our neighbors had gone up on an ATV and taken a photograph of the house, of both of our houses, my uncle's house, which was standing, and our house, which had recently burned. Also later to find a picture, an aerial photograph from CBS News of the house in flames. And so we had both of those photos in an email that my mom sent to me. And I think that made the visit to the house significantly easier because we had already seen it. They had already gone through the process of knowing what it would look like. There was a preview, you know. And so we drove up the canyon together. I ditched class to do it, and we pulled, or as we're driving up the canyon, we see Bald Mountain first and foremost, and the first thing my aunt says is she turns and looks over and says, "Oh, well, it looks like that ugly shack is gone finally." You know, like really good humored about it, and you know, we knew nobody lived there, and I thought it was cool because it was historic, and and she just thought it was an eyesore, and so did my mom, and I had no idea, you know, the things you find out. But so, and that, yeah, I think that opinion may go back further, that, you know, more generations than them. But anyhow, once we crest the hill over Bald Mountain and saw the overlook, that meadow, and just how totally blackened and devastated, it was the first real up close perspective we got on the fire, which was very shocking to me. You know, it was, I thought I was prepared for it, and it was totally, because I'd driven through, you know, going through California and Arizona and some of the places that had forest fires in the past on road trips or things. I'd seen even Sugarloaf. I'd seen kind of what these landscapes had looked like, but I didn't realize that most of those were, I mean, there were trees, young trees growing, so they were, you know, 8 to 10 years old. And something so fresh, you know, 3 or 4 days after it had burned was just stunning. So, yeah, so we went up to the house, and I kind of covered this before, but the first thing that I noticed was that the structures of anything that was aluminum or wood or rubber was just gone. And what you had were the internal components, or the things, for instance, cross beams were gone, but the screws were still in line. You had things like axe handles that had been, or axes that had been wedged into stumps, tree stumps, and just the axe head is sitting in a pile of ash. You know, so these just total, very striking images. And seeing those was really, I mean, devastating and at the same time inspirational, because it entirely, each of them was like a little microcosm of this whole process that had happened. And so we're there and we're just looking because we can't touch the insurance company. In order for us to receive compensation from the insurance company, they needed to confirm it as a total loss. And they needed to send out an agent to say, okay, this was part of this event, they didn't burn it down themselves, it's not fraud, and the house is totally gone, there's no saving it, give them the maximum benefit, basically. And so we were just looking around and observing, and I was having this kind of, I was playing a game where I would look at an object and try and identify what it had been previously. So we had a 2-story home, and so the top floor had collapsed onto the bottom floor. And so it was kind of this mishmash of stuff, but I could still identify, like, oh, those are my dad's speaker stands. And oh, there's our recliner chair, and there's that thing, but it's all in this totally transformed, very different setting and perspective. And that was one of the things I noticed. The other thing that I noticed was that the colors were just incredible. When you fire pottery, a lot of chemical reactions happen and you get these really amazing colors. It's just like fireworks. When you burn magnesium, it's really bright, and copper is really green. And so a lot of the chemicals and things in the house that had been heated up to the point of performing these reactions that were just stunning, just these amazing colors. So that was very striking also. So we went back down, kind of back to as normal as life could be. For me, it was a little more normal. I went back to school. But a couple days later, I called my friend and I said, hey, we still can't touch anything, but I want you to come up and take pictures with me. I want some shots. Mostly I wanted to document the site because I knew nobody had touched it. And so I wanted to go up and make sure that we got good photographs, mostly for the art of it, and also because I knew he was a really great photographer, but and that he would appreciate the opportunity because how often do you get to do this? It's like, fortunately, it's not a frequent thing. So a couple days later, we drove up and got some shots of, we have a huge quartz chimney we had a huge quartz chimney on the house, and it was like this monolith that was standing. It was kind of the last recognizable feature of the house. And so we got a lot of pictures of that, but the quartz was really interesting because it all turned red. There were parts of inside the quartz that were red, and so even that, the structure was similar, but parts of it had changed, and so that was very interesting to me. But so my friend Jeff and I went up and we're taking photographs, and I'm we're walking around, but we're not really pushing things or changing things like we did eventually, but after the, on other photo shoots. But and again, a lot of that was me really getting deep into the site and finding the images that were very meaningful to me in terms of reflecting the process of going through this event. So took a couple trips with him, and then invited a couple of my professors up at a later date after a couple weeks had passed, and what I really wanted to do was document things as they changed, as they progressed. So from the day we were allowed to go up to 3 days later, a week later, how the physical being of the house was processed, until eventually it was just the mountainside and everything had been removed. So when I brought my professors up, both of whom I'm very close with, we really started getting into those colors and textures, and at one point, one of them, Mark McCoyne, who I play music with a lot, and he's a phenomenal person, was like, whoa, look at this. And he found a piece of aluminum and just held it up and whacked it with a stick, and it rang like a chime. And I hadn't, I'd theorized that. I was like, well, that might be really cool, but he found one that was just perfect. It was totally stunning. And so I said, that's it. That's part of my piece. And so we went through, and they're also visually just amazing. They're like miniature sculptures that embody the entire process of this thing. So on one side, there are like pieces of metal or glass or things that haven't been, their structure is still recognizable. And then it's those encased in like a blob of amorphous transformed aluminum and zinc and lead and all the things that were in the house that melted. And so you have on one side these recognizable structures, and on the other side this totally transformed thing. And I again just feel like that totally embodies going through this process. And so I don't want to overstate that point. So I went through and we found a bunch of the structures that I thought were really beautiful for the visual aesthetic, and then also we just hit everything. We were just whacking things all over the place and trying to find the ones that sounded the best. And eventually found quite a few of those. So that was really great. And yeah, so then went back down and had made a couple more trips. Eventually, I have a friend who's a dancer, and I started doing contemporary modern dance. I had been doing it for about maybe a semester and a half when the fire happened, and I decided I wanted to integrate dance into my show as well. And so I brought up a couple of dancer friends just to walk around and feel the site. Both of them had been to my house before, and so before it had burned, and so now they were seeing it in this new way, you know. And that was another thing that was very important to me, was to bring my friends to the place so they could connect with it. You know, I didn't want this to be. I wanted them to be able to relate to me if they were going to participate in art with me, you know. I think that's what makes art strong, is its ability for relation, you know, because somebody can make a piece of art that's very articulate, but if nobody can understand it, then part of it is lost. The transmission part of it is lost. And so I wanted to make sure that my collaborators and the people that I wanted to work with came up and were able to connect with me on that level. And so we went up, we moved around in the space and walked around both around the house site and the forest surrounding it. Something that I realized after this happened is that I wasn't very sad about the house burning. I was mostly sad about the forest burning, because that's where I spent my time as a child. I slept in the house, but I played and I grew outside. And so like when my favorite trees were burned, I was really upset. You know, it was like losing a friend, basically. And so, as hippie as that sounds, but you know, so yeah, and we did some video shots of performing, and none of those eventually made it into the performance, but it was really powerful research for me to know, to physically embody my feelings in that space was a big part of the process. Both in the artistic process and the emotional coping process, it was very important. And yeah, and then I found, okay, on a later trip I brought my friend Janet, who is another very well-established, very wonderful experimental musician in Denver. And she came up, and as we're walking around, she has this incredible eye. I guess she told me later that she, as she was growing up, would just find things, little trinkets or things in the street or in the dirt, and would collect them. And that ability was so valuable when I brought her up to the house, because she was finding all these pieces of glass that were tiny, but were just beautiful, you know, absolutely amazing. And they were warped, and they had bubbles in them, and the color had changed, and they were just very striking. And so we went around and basically spent most of the time collecting these pieces of transformed glass. You know, I had the metal side, and then finding the glass was another part of things. And so that was really wonderful. And so the process, you know, as it's happening, as all of these things are happening, I'm finally solidifying, and in the visual side of things, mostly how this piece is going to look. You know, I know that the video I'm getting is what I'm going to use for the projections. I'm a multimedia artist. I should say that too. So there's a professor at University of Colorado. Her name is Michelle Ellsworth, and she always says her native land is dance. She's a dance professor, but so my native land is music, but I delve into video art and dance, and you know, I guess we call it interdisciplinary, even though I think that's kind of a cop-out, because I think all art is interdisciplinary. But so we, what was I saying? Oh, aesthetically, the show is coming together. And I'm working with one of my composition professors I'm taking lessons all this time. And he's just stunned that I'm even showing up. And then we're going through and kind of talking about what the music is and how I'm doing it, and finally come to like over time, a pretty solid idea of what the whole show is going to be. And so I divided it into movements that were a linear progression of my emotional process for going through all of this, basically. And I should mention that all of this time my mom is asking me, "Are you okay? I haven't seen you cry yet. Are you processing this? Do I need to like send you to somebody you can talk to? Are you able to talk to people?" And being a really good mom. And I'm just like, "Mom, you'll see I'm processing this. I'm just doing it my own way." And so that was actually really good motivation for me to make sure that my art that I felt really genuine about it, that I was making exactly what I wanted, because my mom was saying, "Are you processing this? Is this real? You know, do I need to check in on you?" And every time I was like, "No, it's cool. I'm doing the right thing for myself right now." So, so the piece is divided, in this linear progression. And the first one is a song, very short song that I wrote, where I play harmonium, and I basically sing this verse about how life is full of unexpected things, and that they can happen, you know, in a matter of minutes. Your life can completely change. And then the second movement is, and it's very dark and melancholy, of course. And the second movement is me and a bunch of the objects that I found. Excuse me. The second movement is me and a bunch of objects that I found on the site, and I'm using a thing called a contact microphone, which is a microphone that's made of little crystals, and you can stick it on an object and then get the vibrations that are happening of that object directly. And so I have some chains and like a saw blade that was attached to a table saw, and the blade still looked like a saw blade. It still had the ridges, but it had been totally disembodied from the aluminum housing of the saw. And so I had like this really twisted, it sounded great. It sounded really good. And so I wrote an electronic composition, and then over that, I'm kind of banging these things together and making these sounds, the sounds of those objects. At the same time, one of my friends, Luke, who's one of the dancers that I brought up to the house, is performing sort of a Buto-style inspired dance. Buto came out of post-World War II Japan, and it's very primal and very dark, and it's usually you attempt to reduce yourself to basically your brain stem humanity, your brain stem person, and then you act on that. And I thought that style and the way that especially he embodied it was very effective at portraying the agony of my experience. I thought that it would be, he was physically embodying it in a way that I felt a lot of people would be able to connect to. And so while my music was a little more abstract, I felt that him doing that while I'm performing the music would be a very clear and very representational and articulate way for people to kind of understand that side of things. And so that's the second movement. The third movement is me playing guitar with my friend Curtis, who plays drums, in a punk rock song that I wrote, basically. That was, you know, kind of the aggressive part that comes after the grief, you know. It's kind of, what do they call it? It's the, yeah, we'll hold.
We're continuing our interview here with Nathan Wheeler.
So I remember the point where I left off because it's still very clear to me. The linear progression of the movements of the piece basically follow the 5 stages of grief that have been articulated in, you know, a lot of like psychology textbooks and things. They all talk about it. And I can't remember it exactly, but I know that generally it's you know, you're really sad, and then you get really pissed off, and then you get really defeatist, and then things work out. You get over it, or you move on, basically. And so the third movement of the piece was this punk rock song, really aggressive, distorted guitar and drums, and just very fast and angry, and I'm yelling these lyrics about how many structures were burned, and how, you know, yeah, just embodying the anger of it. And to me, those 2 movements are, I'm glad that's the first half, because that was the first half of my experience, basically. And I also wanted to make sure that those movements were in there to let people know, like, obviously this is not fun and games for me. Obviously I'm not trying to exploit this. You know, this is not an attempt to take advantage of an opportunity. One thing that I have to do as an artist is consider how my work is going to be interpreted, whether or not it's true or whether or not I care. It's what are critics going to say? What are people potentially going to say about this piece? And my biggest fear was that they were going to say, oh, he's taking advantage of it, you know. So I wanted to make sure that there was something in there where to not refute that, but for me to stand on and to say, look, this wasn't easy for me. This is not easy for me, but this is how I'm processing it, you know. And I think that came across. I really do. In addition to that, that was the answer to all of my mom's questions of, are you processing this? How are you getting through this? I just kept saying, just watch. You'll see it. The fourth movement is the movement that kind of embodies my process of finding all the objects that make the sounds and seeing all the textures, and actually the adventure and the excitement that I got out of it. You know, because along with all of the grieving and all of that, I was really overwhelmed with this sense of beauty. Totally objective in my mind. Well, although beauty is a human interpretation. So, okay, let's say beauty without, oh geez, wow, I don't know how to articulate it. I wasn't saying, oh wow, this is really cool, yeah, let's do this all the time, you know, but it was really beautiful in this amazing way that was totally out of human hands. And mostly because of the scale of it. But so finding all of these things that had been transformed and the tiniest, minutest details of these things were just incredible to me. And so the fourth movement, my friends Mark and Janet, who are the experimental musicians from Denver that I'm very close with, I worked with them and I suspended a number of these pieces of aluminum from a pipe that was suspended from the ceiling. And then and I used fishing line. And then so they were all kind of laid out, and then they had drumsticks and all these crazy things, and they were making sounds on these objects. And then I had all of the objects mic'd with these contact microphones, the same thing that I was using earlier in the performance. And so instead of just being these little plink, tink kind of sounds, they were huge, massive, and like cathedral chimes or something sounding, you know, because they were amplified in this massive system. And so this great sound system in the black box, which I'll get to. But and during this movement, I also decided that I wanted to dance. And so I was performing with my friend Sky, who's the other dancer that I had brought up. And so she and I kind of we did some loose choreography, we did a lot of rehearsal, but most of it was improvised. And the kind of the story behind the piece is that she's the spirit of kind of, I want to say the optimism, but I mean, I'm not going to lie, a lot of good things, in spite of all the bad things that have happened, a lot of good things have come out of this for me and my family. And so, and maybe it's just because we are trying really hard to find benefit in it. Maybe it's our approach to life, I'm not sure. But in any case, she represented that spirit, the spirit of the good things that have come out of it, and me discovering those. And so I really felt while I was moving around in the wreckage of the house and finding these objects that I was kind of dancing with it, and I was having a physical interplay and an interaction. And so the piece had this arc that was kind of me slowly over this period of the dance interacting with her more and more as the dance progressed. And they start out as really small touches and little prods, and it's the first time I smile in the whole piece, you know. But and then slowly they move into lifts and a lot of more full body interactions and contact and things like that. So yeah, so that's the fourth movement. And then the fifth movement is me performing solo again. So all of the dancers cleared the stage, and I perform a piece that I call Settling. That's basically kind of the aftermath, how I felt in the aftermath. And it's an ambient piece, and it's all harmonium and bells and flute and these sounds that I'm looping into my laptop. And so I'll play a sound and I'll kind of set up and I'll record it into the laptop, and then the laptop will play back a loop of what I just played. And so it's building this kind of thing, and there's the whole goal was to bring about a feeling of serenity, of this kind of acceptance, like, okay, this happened. And this is how I'm comfortable with it now. I've processed it, I've dealt with it. And it was, to me, it brought closure. It's funny because I talked to people, I did a talkback session after the performances, and many people would say things like, the piece didn't feel like it cadenced, like it ended. I mean, it felt like an end, but it didn't feel like a big final end to it, you know. And I think there are two sides of that to me. The first one is kind of this expectation in Western art. Well, I wouldn't say Western. This expectation in certain arts to have a big climax. You know, you listen to a piece and you want a big final ending, and or something like that, as opposed to something that maybe doesn't necessarily have a beginning, middle, and end, or it does, but they're very subtle. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is that it's not finished. My experience is not finished. It's still happening all the time, and everything that's going on now is directly or indirectly a result of what happened previously. And so it was kind of me acknowledging that also, this kind of like, this sense of finality without finality, basically. I don't know if that comes across, but yeah. So the piece was performed January 28th and 29th in what is now the Roser Atlas Building, Black Box Theater, on the CU campus, the University of Colorado campus. I had worked in the theater for 3 years prior to putting on this show. And in my final semester had applied for a residency in the space. And they granted it to me. This was way before the fire happened. I had applied for this residency, and I just wanted to make a big piece. I just wanted to make a final composition piece. And what ended up coming out of it was this, basically. In a way, I felt like the fire was the perfect reason to make a piece. I don't think I would have done as well if I hadn't had such a significant event occur, And when I say well, I mean that I don't think the process would have been as easy. I would have had to search a lot more to be articulate, but it just gave me the perfect ground on which to build this expression.
So when you think about the performances, what went through your mind? Were you aware of the audience? Were you aware of certain people's possible reactions to it? Were you aware of the fact that the Boulder Daily camera had featured you?
Right. So during the process of making the piece, I dealt with I can't remember his title, but his name is Ira, and he deals with all the in-house press and publications in the Atlas building for the events. He makes the posters that they put up, he does the web blasts, he promotes everything. And I had him come down, I would say maybe halfway through the process, after I had gone through and kind of, after I had gone through with Janet and found all these little pieces of glass that were just beautiful, and found all these massive sculptures. I'll show you one at the end of the interview. These pieces that are just stunning in their scale and in their how well they articulate the destruction, the sheer destruction of what happened. And so I had them all laid out on these blankets, on these sheets, so that I could look at them and say, okay, well, this one should go there, and this one should be used for this thing. And I was like trying to figure out, because there were some that looked really good and sounded really good too, and I couldn't figure out whether I wanted to use them as sculptures or as instruments. And so that was a fun process. But so then he came down with his camera to start taking photos for the poster, and he was just floored. Just totally floored. He was like, this is amazing. Because most people had seen the smoke and the flames, but they hadn't really connected with it. And so I think to have these pieces, it's a very articulate and direct way to give people a venue to relate to it. To say, wow, this used to be part of someone's home, and this is what it looks like now. And to me, it's still beautiful. And that's why I wanted to share it. There are plenty of really nasty, ugly-looking things too, and that's, I don't need to share those. I want to share the ones that are very striking to me. And so here I am with 5 twin bed sheets full of all of this stuff, and he comes down with his camera and he starts taking these photos, and he's just floored. And so he goes up to get the Bruce, the guy who does all of the external publications and promotions for the Atlas building. And Bruce comes down and takes a look and says, we have to contact the Daily Camera about this. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know if I want to do an interview because I've been misquoted a lot and whatever. So I didn't hear back from him for a long time. But he said, we got to contact the camera. And then I would say it was the Tuesday before the performance. The performances were Friday and Saturday. Tuesday was load in, and I had set up everything. And Bruce calls me and he says, can I give your phone number to the Daily Camera? They want to meet with you. And I said, sure. So they called, I think is the next day, it was the Wednesday, and they came in and got, I did an interview with one of the reporters, and then they sent in a photographer later that day. So I knew that they were coming, and I knew, and I had done the interview, but I didn't know it was going to be on the front page. And I didn't know that, the Atlas building has, with chairs set up, the maximum allowed capacity is like 160 people or something like that. And this gets blasted in the newspaper and online to the whole local community who has been affected by it. And I only know of, like, my family, who I reserved tickets for right away. I made sure they got it. Other than that, I only know of a couple other Sunshiners that got in, which I also feel pretty bad about. I knew it was going to be a short-lived thing, and I knew that no matter who got to see it, it would be great. But so when the performance rolled around, I didn't look at or acknowledge the audience at all until afterwards, which is actually a really fun experience as a performer. There are two reasons for that. The first one is that I'm really empathetic, and if I connect too much with the audience beforehand, I stop focusing on the music and on my performance and on myself. And so I didn't go out to look and see who was there. I didn't do any of that. It's like when the show started was when it started, and that was when my interaction with the audience began. And only afterwards, when we did a Q&A session, was I able to see, like, oh, those people came? Oh, that person was sitting right in front of me the whole time and I didn't even see them, So that was there were a lot of surprises, and it was really fun. But yeah, both nights sold out and had standing room, and people were showing up I had a bunch of people just come and they were just sitting on the floor. There were no chairs for them, and they came in and sat on the floor anyway. And yeah, it's funny. A lot of them were my friends, because I promoted it primarily through Facebook, and so my friends were the ones who got the tickets first. And yeah. So I guess that's, in terms of the audience and that connection. It wasn't until afterwards that I started talking to people, and what was really fun, there are two things. Okay, my friends, it was really interesting to see their reactions to the sculptures, to the visual side of things. Just very interesting, as it is to see everybody's, but to get that many people together in one space and have them all have a shared experience was, pretty powerful for me. Yeah, and afterwards, there's still, I run into people sometimes when I come back. I live in Brooklyn now, but when I come back, I still run into people who say, hey, didn't you do that fire performance? I think I saw that. Or, people who just will run into me at a coffee shop or something, and we'll say something. But by and large, I haven't done much about the fire in my art since it happened. I think I have a tendency in my artistic training to when I make a piece, to kind of give it an end. Even if that end is this ambiguous thing, it's like the show will stop eventually. And when it did, I kind of had this mindset from the start where I said, well, I'm taking this stuff that other people think is trash and turning it into art. And at the end of the day, I really won't care if it's just returned back to trash again, because I made my art with it. And so when I performed the last night of the piece, I said, hey, do any of you people who have really helped me through this, or who have been a significant figure in my life up to this point, do you want a piece of this show? Do you want one of the sculptures that's on display? Do you want, like one of my professors, I made him wind chimes out of some of the pieces that were, the aluminum pieces that were suspended, and I gave it to him. And so a lot of it has been distributed throughout the community, my artistic community. And I still have some pieces. I saved the big ones for my family, of course. But yeah, so I kind of drew a line there. And I said, well, I don't want to wallow in this forever. I don't want to keep feeling like I have to process this, because this was it, at least for now. I'll come back to it later, I'm sure. But I was ready at that point to kind of hit pause. So this piece is one of the 3 sculptures that I featured in the show. This was found in the garage area of the house, which was actually an external structure. It was a historical shed that was built at the turn of the last century, and it was where my grandfather kept all of his tools. This piece is called 30 pounds, and I named the 3 sculptures based on their weight because I felt like that was the most discernible characteristic that was still true about it based on its previous form, if that makes any sense. So the one thing that this has in common with what it was previously before it was burned is how much it weighs collectively. And so in it, you have a bunch of components from different things that were stored in the garage. They're pieces of broken glass. There's all of this wood and these nails and things that are, made out of metal or substances where the melting point is still above the temperature of the fire. And then you have these blobs and these charred pieces that are the metal and wood and things that have a melting point below the temperature. And so embedded up in this area here, you see a bunch of screws. And that's why my mom calls this piece screwed, because that's what we were, is what she says. But so I just felt like the form and also the juxtaposition of forms where you have this easily recognizable structure embedded in this previously molten, totally transformed thing is just very striking. There's, there's a lot of depth to it. There are bubbles and all these formations, and also traces of previous things like dirt. And the back of these are all pine needles. You can see the impression of almost fossilized, charred pine needles on the back. And so I had, I had these out in a place where you can walk around them and look at the back and the front and see kind of what the whole piece is. So this is the second of 3 pieces. This is called 22 pounds, 7 ounces, again for its weight. And this one is really striking for the reason that you have this chain that's very recognizable and twisted in this kind of violent way. That's a part of my grandfather's chainsaw that we actually used to help mitigate the property, to try, fire prevention, basically. And so this is where that chainsaw and that effort ended up. But we got some warm winters out of it too. So, burning the wood that we cut down to keep us warm. But so this is just another. There also, there's some small identifiable, semi-identifiable, but these pieces of steel that have had their outside context removed. But this one's a lot thicker and a lot deeper than the other one. The other one is more shallow, but this weighs about only a few ounces less, 9 ounces less than the other one.